Today we're not just building a bow, we're building my personal RX-9 Ultra to be the ultimate 3D target shooting Western killer. We're gonna run through everything from draw length adjustments to poundage. I'm gonna go through our cam sync and timing and the whole kit and caboodle from the rest to the sight. First step we're gonna do is get that draw length adjusted with Hoyt. What they've done from years past is they've got their new HBX Gen 4 cam. And what's cool about that bow now is they are 1/4 inch adjustments in draw length, so I can be ultra precise, and it gets you that ability to still have 3/4 of an inch of adjustment. For my personal draw length, I'll be able to go anywhere from a 29 1/4 inch draw length all the way up to a 30 inch inside of that module. So it gets you to be quite a bit more precise, which also helps to aid in maintaining a little bit more speed. The first thing I'm doing is just switching out. As right now, we're currently sitting in a draw length that's a little bit too short for me, so we're just gonna take those out and we are gonna swap it over. And one thing that I've already done with it is you'll be able to see on those modules, you'll have that 75, 80, and 85% adjustment on what's called the foot of your mod. And what that allows me to do for target bow is I wanna have a little bit more holding weight. I still personally don't like 75 is a little bit too aggressive for me personally, but I am able to go and adjust it just one step down off of its max let off, which is 85%. To me, having a little bit more holding weight is just gonna help me point a little bit better. Keeps you a little bit more honest in your back wall as well. With this bow, I'll be still sitting around 70-ish pounds. We'll see how it feels in the range, but plan as of now is to shoot it at 70 pounds, which with an 80% mod should have me sitting right around that 14 to 15-ish pounds of hold weight, which I found for everything 3D is a great way to go. Indoor, sometimes I'll weight it up a little bit more, increase my holding weight, maybe drop it down to that 75%, but for everything, if I'm doing 3D shooting, I don't want to be shooting an uphill angle with a lot more demanding of a cam and have myself coming off of that back wall. So we're just gonna get those mods adjusted, and we're gonna start it at a 30-inch draw length and see how that's feeling. And then once we get that swapped out, we will throw a D-loop on and run it through cam timing or cam sync right away to make sure both those cams are rolling in time with one another. So we've got that set up at 30 inches and at 80% let off. So we're gonna throw it into the bow vise here, and we're just gonna get a really rough estimate of center shot. We're just gonna tie on just a temporary D-loop for now, just so we can make sure sync is good. And then once we go into tying in our Nock sets, we'll retie a D-loop that's gonna be a little bit more specific to a length I personally like. So once we got that tied on, I'm just gonna angle it so I can see a little bit better. And then I'm just gonna throw on an arrow square just so that we know we're pulling somewhere relatively in the middle of the bow. And then what I'm looking for, just for a rough start, is running right through the middle of your burger hole, which is where you're gonna be mounting your rest. On those RX-9s, you're gonna have your 9 Ultra emblem in the middle of it. I wanna be running my square just to start out right through the middle of that. And I'm just gonna have my D-loop sitting just a hair high of dead center right away, just for a good starting point. And that gets us the ability to at least throw it into a draw board and see what we're looking like for cam sync. And once we get to that point, we've got our limbs are maxed out right now, which they should be around that 70-pound range. We'll pull it back on the scale just to make sure it's pulling the weight that I'm looking for right away before we throw it into the draw board, just to make sure nothing changes in between timing and after. So let's head into the range. We're gonna go get a weight on this bad boy. All right, so we're sitting right at 74.3. So we are coming in hot, which is pretty common. We'll do it one more time just for our consistency. Same thing, 73.7, so we're in that 74 range. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna turn it down just a little bit. Let's swing on out. And then all of our weight adjustments are just gonna be in our top limb bolts. We just wanna make sure that we're taking even turns out of the top and the bottom. So I'm just noting the direction of that Allen wrench. Right now we're sitting right around 4 pounds hot. I'm gonna take just one, I'm gonna take a turn and a quarter out of it right away. And we'll see where that gets us. That'll at least get us shooting right away. So same thing here, noting where we're at. Do a turn and a quarter. And let's swing back in the range. Let's see where that got us. All right, 69.1. 68.7. So we'll start it with there. We'll see how it's shooting. If we want to make little adjustments down the road, that is completely fine, but let's swing right over into the third lane now, and we are going to check our cam sync. And what we're going to be looking for is when we're drawing that bow back, I want to be able to make sure that both my top and my bottom cams are hitting their cables at the same time. So what we're looking for is I'm watching our 2 foots on our modules, and as we pull that back, we'll see those come into the cams as I slowly creep it. And so right now we can see my bottom cam is touching, but my top cam is sitting just a hair outside right now. So we're just gonna make a quick adjustment in our cables to get that cam sync where we're looking. So let's swing on out. We'll head into the bow press. And then one thing that we're noting is when I was pulling it back with the scale, we are sitting a little bit hot. We're sitting or a little bit too light in poundage. So like right now we're sitting around that 69-ish pounds. So when I'm adding twists into my controls, I'm also thinking about that as well, because as I add tension and take out tension from my cables, that will also affect my poundage. So right now our bottom cam is hitting fast. What we're gonna want to do is add twists into that bottom control that is going underneath the axle on our bottom cam. And by adding tension into that control, that's also slightly helping us get a little bit closer to our poundage. So I just pull that bowstring off of that cam track. It allows me to be able to access that down cable just a little bit easier. Then I'm taking that control cable, and right now I'm just gonna add a full twist and a half right now. And we'll see where that gets us. Throw it back onto that post. Make sure we're all lined up, and we're back into that draw board. And then one thing to note too is we are getting it built day 1 today, so something that's important to remember is after you get that couple hundred shots in and everything's starting to feel good, it's definitely worth bringing it back in and just running through that tune again, making sure that those strings and cables are setting in properly. So let's see where we got here. So now our bottom is touching and our top is right there too. I'd say if anything, we are money right now. Perfect. Cam sync is done. All right, so now that we've got our sync done, I can run through, I'm gonna mount the bulk of our accessories now so that we can finish out everything with it fully built up. So first things that I'm gonna do right away is throw on an arrow rest. We are running the Hoyt MX2. It runs that micro adjustment on them, which is really nice for when I'm going to be fine tuning any type of, if I'm going to be bare shaft tuning, or say I'm going to be using it as a Western bow when I'm out trying to broadhead tune. Those micro adjustments just give me a little bit more peace of mind when I am trying to make those small adjustments. I'm not throwing anything out of whack. So micro adjustments, cannot emphasize enough. I love them. So first thing we're doing with that MX2 is we're just pulling off that plate. This is really just going to be your set screw for when we make those micro adjustments down the road. And then we'll see on the inside of that plate, you've got just a itty bitty baby Allen wrench inside of there, or screw set screw. So we're going to loosen that up. And then when it comes to mounting it onto that bow, if you want to take a look on the side of the bow here, Hoyt's going to have witness marks on the side of that IMS, that integration mounting system, to where I want to line up the arrow or the indicator of my arrow rest to the indicator of that bow. Important thing to note on these MX2s is when you are snugging down that set screw, you don't want to wrench them extremely tight. Otherwise you might end up dealing with that, your micro adjust knobs binding up on you a little bit. So if I go anything wrenched down super tight, I might not be able to move my micro adjusts really easy up and down for them. So throw on that plate, then we'll snug that up so it holds us in place. And there's two things that we're looking at doing when we're throwing on an arrow rest. One, we want to make sure our center shot, which is our left and right adjustments on the rest, are set. And the other is going to be our actual nock height. And now that we know we've got my rest or my cam timing synced up, I hopefully shouldn't have to worry about making any adjustments down the road. So I should be able to set all of this now and not have to worry about any of that changing down the road. So the first thing that we are going to do is I'm gonna loosen up and take off that current D-loop that we are just using for the drawboard. And we are going to swap that out with first Nock sets, and then we will retie a new D-loop on there that we can kind of match up a little bit more specific to length I like. For D-loop lengths, I personally like sitting around like 5/8-ish of an inch for that total D-loop length. I find for myself personally shooting a handheld release, it gives me enough length to be able to get any kind of hand torque that I have in it out, but it's not so long that I'm having to shorten up my draw length because of that consequent adjustment for having a longer loop. So we're gonna go back. When I'm setting my nock height, I'm gonna throw my arrow square in the bow, and we're gonna use our best friend, the silver Sharpie, to get us first just a mark that I'm going to use for my top nocking set. Then what I'm looking at doing is having an indication mark where I personally like sitting right around like a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch above center. What that helps do traditionally on the target side, and when you're looking at how your pin floats, is it adds a little bit more pressure above the center of the bow, which just helps to kind of hold that pin down. Kind of steadies your pin up a little bit more. I find if you go really low out of the center, say I run my arrow through the bottom of that burger hole, I'll end up seeing a lot of times that my pin float can kind of be all over the place, where once you start bringing that D-loop up at a certain height, you just start feeling how that pin float or your pin movement just changes and kind of settles itself down a little bit. So this is where we're gonna start. And what we're gonna do is run nock sets on those. And nock sets just give us that breathing room on our string to minimize the amount of nock pinch that we're gonna have on the arrow rest or on our arrow's nock. And then it also allows us to give it, we're gonna do both the nock set above and below, and we're gonna make sure that we have a couple more knots tied on the bottom side of that nock, which allows us just to have that ever so slight downward pressure on that arrow rest. So it just helps a little bit in that consistency. And then actually before we do that, I'm just gonna throw a little bit of wax on that serving. Wax just helps to hold everything just a little bit more snug in place, keeps your knots a little bit tighter, and it also helps to, we're running BCY 3D serving, and it just helps to melt that ball down a little bit better for you, so you're not dealing with them fraying out as much. And then for our nock sets, I personally like running a constrictor knot, self-tightening knot that will not come loose. You don't really have to worry about that knot undoing itself over time. And I'm just gonna do 4 wraps for that constrictor on the top. And that constrictor knot wraps underneath. Sometimes can be a little bit of a pain to get through, but once it's tied, it holds extremely well. And then as we're tightening that down, we're making a note to set that right on top of that silver Sharpie that we made. We're going to cover that all the way up so we're at that same nocking height. This will be for our top nock set. Again, I'm running 4 wraps on the top. We're going to pull that tight, and that's a self-tightening knot, so the harder I pull, the more it's going to tighten down. And then just to be able to get those tag ends up on top of that knot, so I'm not trying to melt that fire down right next to my serving of my bowstring, we're just going to end it with a square knot. So right over left, left over right, just for alternating overhands. Cut and burn, and top is done. And then when we're tying our bottom Nock set, what you want to make sure we do is we have the arrow that you're going to be shooting with the nocks that you're going to be shooting. So the way that I'm building this right now is just going to be for target, which I'm not going to be shooting lighted nocks at all with. Whereas once we switch over, if say I'm bringing it out as a Western bow and I want to be using lighted nocks, I would just want to make sure that my nock fit is lining up with that width of the nock that I would be hunting with. Okay, top done. Then we're gonna grab our arrow. For 3D, I'm using the Easton 5.0. It's a nice light grain per inch. This is the 300 spine. It's running 8.4 grains per inch, which is about as light as you're gonna find. And then just running Easton's micro light nocks. One thing that I didn't mention before that we've already tested is going to be that nock fit on the serving as well. So you can see as I knock that arrow onto that string, I can see I can loosely move that in and out, but still coming off that string really easy. If it were something where I had, when I knocked that arrow onto the string and it snaps on really hard, I would just want to think about potentially just pulling off that center serving and just downsizing into a little bit smaller serving diameter, so you get a little bit cleaner of a nock release on there. Nock pinch in any way, shape, or form is never really a good thing. So now we're just doing that same thing. I'm going to take my silver Sharpie again, and then what I personally like to do when I'm making these is I'll usually just count serving strands on my bowstring, and I want to make sure that I have just a little bit of nock play in between my two nock sets. So when I'm looking through it, I'm going to give myself right around 2 servings width. And what that lets me do is, obviously right now with that string sitting completely relaxed, it's going to feel like there's movement in that nock, but as soon as we pull that bow back, you're going to have that, those gaps are going to get a little bit tighter to one another. Again, just throwing a little bit of wax on that serving. I've already got those marks so I can pull that nock off. Set that aside for now. Then same thing, we're going to do a constrictor knot again, except this time I'm going to have 2 or 3 more twists added into that knot. Again, that just gives you just a little bit, allows you to pull from slightly above center from that D-loop and gives you just slight downward nock pressure or arrow pressure on your launcher. That's 4, 5, 6. Now for the fun part, make sure you don't drink too much caffeine before you start this, or it may be a lot more fun for you to deal with. Okay, and same thing when I'm pulling that tight, just want to make sure I'm not balling up any of those knots. Make sure those tag ends are pulling directly in line with one another. If they get a little bound up, that's fine. Take your time. We only want to do this once. And then once you've got them all stacked on, we're going to move it up to that mark. And same thing, it's self-tightening knot, so we're going to bring her all the way forward. Pull tight, that's going to snug it down. Then same thing, just square knot to finish it. All right, on to the D-loop. So for myself personally, I'm okay with burning an extra, wasting an extra maybe ½ inch of material. I'm always going to make sure I've got enough to tie that length that I need. Usually you're going to need around 4.5-ish inches of D-loop material, but when I'm building my target bows, I like to be able to make sure that I'm a little bit more precise with the length that I'm making. So with this is BCY 24. It'll melt nicely. It's nice and strong. I'm just gonna flare that out. Just take that lighter, really slow heat. I'm only gonna melt one side of it right now. And once we get that nice rounded ball, I'll personally just take the side of my lighter and just compress it just a hair. I don't try to make it flat or skinny by any means, but I just try to get just that rounded ball down a hair. I personally like the looks of it more than anything, and to me it just feels like a little bit flatter of a head's just gonna hold a little bit stronger. Personal preference. And then I'll go and I'll tie that top knot right away. When we're tying those D-loops, I always want to make sure that that top knot is facing away from the face of the shooter. So right-handed shooter, my knot's going to be facing off to the right side of the bow, looking behind it. And then what I'm going to be doing is using a pliers that doesn't have teeth on it, so I'm not chewing up that D-loop. I'm going to hold on to that D-loop material, and I'm just going to get that top knot as tight as we should right away. Pulling that little bit of slop out of it so that I know what I'm going to be looking at for my tag end is as close to possible to what I'm going to be wanting for total D-loop height or length. And then we're just going to tie that bottom knot for our D-loop. I'm always going to start out by pulling all of my slack out so it's pretty tight in between that D-loop. And then like what I've found for myself personally to get myself really close is when I'm running that really shallow D-loop, I'm going to go through and just take my knife and I'm going to give myself just a little bit extra room past where I would traditionally burn it down to make it that short of a knot. I found in the past that gets it very, very close to how I like my D-loops. And then instead of just fraying and burning that knot right next to the string and D-loop, I'm just gonna pull that knot out so that I can burn it away from the string because I don't want to burn my string. Same thing as before, just really slow radiant heat to melt that knot down. And then once we get that on, we are going to double check our center shot, which is our left and right adjustments on our arrow rest. Again, just really light compression on there. Then I'll just get it just snug with our Easton D-loop pliers. I'm not going to wrench on it because I don't want to be creasing that center serving under the string at all. Pull that slack out. And then I'm going to use our Viper D-loop pliers just to get a little bit better even tension on that string so we're not cranking down on just the middle of the bowstring. And that looks just about perfect for my preferred D-loop length. Now what we're going to do is make sure that our center shot is on, because ideally you want that arrow running right down the middle of the bow. So I'm going to take my tape measure, and I want to measure for Hoyt, so I'm going to measure 7/8 of an inch center shot. So I'm running from the inside edge of that shelf of the riser to the center of my arrow, which right now looks like we are sitting just a hair inside of the bow. First, gonna make a really quick adjustment. Again, what's nice about this MX2 is I've got micro adjustments, so I don't have to worry about just cracking a set screw loose and bumping it way out of the way. I can loosen up the adjustment that I need and have confidence that I'm not gonna have to do a ton of work to get it back to center. And once that's loose, what I'm gonna be looking at is my witness marks on the inside of that arrow rest. So right now I know I'm a little bit too close to the center of the bow. I'm a little bit too far inside of the riser. So I'm just gonna take our micro adjustment knob and just ever so slightly just pull it just a hair out. And we'll throw that arrow on as we're doing that just to make sure we're getting it to the direction that we need. So again, looking for 7/8. We are pretty much right there. Okay, center shot done, knock height done. We'll pull that out. Accessories right away, we'll throw on our sight stabilizers, back bar, and one of my favorites for target shooting and shooting outside, the Hoyt Go sticks. We'll start off with the sight. I am going to be running the dialed proof. I am running that in a vertical 3-pin. It's a 10,000ths pin, so I'm going to be really precise for those longer range shots. And I found with this sight, it gives you very bright pins too. A lot of times where you're in full sun, I'm going to be using that optic slide on that sight to be able to tune how much light's being let into those fiber optics. So super cool feature for if I'm going to be sitting out there and I have to take a 90-yard shot at a little mini standing black bear out in the total archery shoots, and my pin is just blowing up with crazy bright pins. I can just dim that pin down a ton, and vice versa. Say I'm out in the woods and it's a little bit more shade and I need to let in as much light as possible, I can pull it all the way back. And then this is their pick mount version, which just helps to keep everything inline mounted to my bow, which just helps to keep a little bit less weight off to the side of the bow. So we are going to throw that right on that front pick mount. So as we're getting our sight mounted up, what we are going to be looking for is I'm going to take our Hamskea 3rd axis leveler, and first step for first axis is going to be making sure that our bow is sitting nice and square. And what Hoyt has, especially when you're using these 3rd axis levelers, is if you look on the tops of their risers, they have got where your limb bolt gets pressed into your riser. They've got that nice square machine piece where sometimes it can be kind of hard to find a nice square piece on some of these newer bows, but if you run it right up onto that top bar, that'll get us mounted into a nice square part on that bow. So I can see right now, I'm just going to be able to just micro adjust my press to get my bubble level sitting right down the middle. And once I have that lined up perfectly, we'll be able to pull that off. So bow is completely square. I'm going to run that leveler right on the top of that rail. Now I always like to pitch that leveler just down to where I've got a nice flat side of that hexagon butted up against the square side of that rail. And we're just gonna snug it up onto there and we'll see what first axis is looking like. So right now we are very close. We are just a hair on the left side of that bubble. What we are going to do is, in order to access our first axis screws, we're just gonna pop that mounting bracket off, and then our first axis adjustments are going to be both set up in here. So when I'm doing first axis, I can just loosen up that bottom set screw, and then I'm just going to make sure that piece is physically loose, and once it's loose I can reattach it onto that sight. And when I'm mounting them onto this sight, you can notice Hoyt has 3 individual pick mounts on there. I personally start it in the middle to see how my 20-yard sight end looks on them. If it's something where I'm going to be hitting, if I need to be able to drop my whole housing up or down more where I'm running out of adjustment, I can always get a little bit more range of it by mounting my sight a little bit higher or a little bit lower. But for right now, until we know what we're looking at, we are going to just throw it in the middle of that adjustment. And then on your first axis, they've got them labeled. You'll see that first mark on those set screws. They're just running 2 married set screws into one another where I can back out one side, add into the other, and micro adjust it one way versus the other. So I'm going to go and back out one side. I'm just gonna start by just taking a half a turn out of one, and then I'm gonna add it into my other side. I can actually see I'm moving the opposite direction, so trial and error, we're gonna run half opposite direction. We'll add that full back into the other side to get us close. And as I'm doing this, this allows me with that micro adjust, I can be really precise as I'm watching my bubble level on my sight. So I'm getting set up, and right here is right where first axis is perfect. So So right now I have that set screw tied on the other side. I'm just gonna add tension into that backside that was loose just to snug down and lock in my first axis. And now we've got first axis, our rail is sitting perfectly right down the middle. Then we can move back into our second axis adjustment, which is gonna be how our rail ties into our bubble level on our mag. I can see again, we're just a smidge off, and on our bow sight, we're hanging just on the right side of that line. So for second axis, it's gonna be something similar, just on the front side of that rail, where I am going to crack loose, again, just that bottom old set screw. And then my second axis adjustments, similar to first, are gonna be right on both of these two sides. So same idea, we're gonna be doing something similar, adding a little bit, taken out of the other side here. So I'm just gonna slowly add, and all I'm wanting to do now is match up my bubble level from my rail to the bubble level on my mag. Add into the other side, again, trial and error, we'll move the opposite direction. I'm actually gonna switch into a little bit longer of a Allen wrench. And then again, just lining up that bubble level with our rail so we're close, just a little bit more. And I want to be really precise with this because as I start shooting further out in range and angles, it is going to affect when I'm looking at my bubble level. I want to make sure that I am sitting right down the middle, because if my second axis or first axis is off, what that ends up doing is taking my vertical stack of my pins, and if my 20-yard pin is sitting up here, but my following trajectory isn't level, we're effectively shooting our bow like this. So as I shoot 20 up here and 100 down here, that's gonna change our windage impacts on them. So that's why it's crucial just to make sure our first, second, third axis are locked in, and our third axis will be for our angled shots. So again, just being really particular, making sure that's looking good. It's a little bit too much. And then our last axis adjustment that we have is third axis, which is done at an angle. So same idea. What I'm looking at in my third axis is going to be how it's essentially like your door hinge motion, where I want to make sure that how my scope lines up to how square my bow is. I'll make sure that that angle is on, so that when I'm looking at my bubble level shooting uphill or downhill, I'm locked in. And I'll always start it in a vise. Usually once I head out to the range, I like to shoot in my third axis. I'm shooting at those uphill and downhills and just see how your windage impacts are for shooting both up and down. But for now, it gets you very, very close. I don't think I'm a good enough shot now to be able to tell the difference from in a vise to my own personal grip. But same thing here, so when we're angled down, again, I'm lining up that Hamskea third axis leveler on that rail. I can see I'm just a hair outside again with that third axis. So in order to access those, what I'm going to do is just loosen up and pull off a set screw, which is just my windage knob, and my third axis set screw is right behind my windage arm. So I'm just getting that set up to where it's just barely cracked loose on there, and then what I'm going to be looking at doing is just changing how that bubble hinges back and forth to line up with that bubble level. So, and then just like that, we've got third axis is set. So we're going to lock that set screw down, throw back on our windage set screw, just because that's behind that adjustment screw that we need. And axis and leveling is done. And the rest we're gonna throw on our stabilizers. And then we are going to attach the Hoyt SL side mount bracket, which is what we are going to use to attach our back bar. That SL side mount is nice because it's extremely small and compact, and then mounts directly into the side of that carbon riser. So instead of having to mount something on the back side or on a rear bushing, we are going to mount that right through that side bracket. And then for right now, we're just gonna snug it up into a relatively vertical position going straight up and down. So I just wanna make sure it's just hanging relatively close to flat to what my angle of my front bar is gonna be for now. And we can, as I'm shooting the bow, and we can always change that pitch if we wanna change how that pin floats. Stabilizers are always one of those things where I'd say it takes a lot of shots or a lot of reps before you kind of understand where you need it to go. So for right now, I'm gonna probably just shoot it at just a really stock position. And then as I progress, as I get more reps in, I'm gonna just make slight adjustments as I feel fit to try to change how my pin floats or moves. For that 10-inch bar, that's getting threaded on, and that's just an easy on and off. So if I'm going in and out of the case, it's just a quick quarter turn, and you're on and off. So super simple, on and off for them. And then what I'm gonna do right away is just adjust those weights to what I've found in the past fit a little bit better for my own personal style of shooting. With most of my target bows, I'm usually running somewhere around a 2-to-1 to 3-to-1 ratio of weight on my back bar to weight on my front bar, biased towards the back. So I'm gonna steal a couple of those weights off my front bar and add it onto that grub screw. So we're just pulling those off. I'll probably take one of those 1-ounce tungstenoids and one of those 1/3-ounce tungstens just to shoot in and see how we like it as a good starting point. So we're just gonna take off, we'll just thread them out at the bottom of that grub screw. That's our aluminum 1/3 ounce. This is our tungsten 1 ounce. Once we got those, that can get threaded back on. Now we can throw on our Go sticks, which is a lifesaver when it comes to you shooting in your backyard, shooting total archery, or walking around the courses and you don't have anywhere to hang your bow. It's a great built-in bipod. It also works as its weight below your hand, so it can help a little bit in your stability of the bow as well. So that first thing we're gonna do is just take off that bottom dampener. And we are going to run that. Let's just throw it in the vise here to make it a little bit easier for us. Just set in our set screw. This is really just a locking screw to hold that Go stick in place so it doesn't pitch on you left and right at all. Just holds it a little bit more stable. Mount that right into that very bottom bushing. What that does for us now, when we pull this out of the vise, is say I'm out shooting in the backyard or I'm shooting a course and I've got nowhere to put my bow down, that Go stick just is spring-loaded bipod that you pull out forward so you can set it down. And Hoyt thought about that, and they have found a way to also help keep your cam track out of the dirt and grime too by throwing on just that little added rubber protector as a little foot to the bottom of that cam, so that when you get set up and you put that onto the ground, I can run those sticks up front, run it back onto that cam, and I'm keeping that string track out of the dust and dirt and grass. So, and we should be ready to start slinging some arrows. So we're gonna swing on over to the bow press, and I'm just gonna take that back bar off for now, just so it's out of the way, and I'm gonna tuck the Go sticks in. Again, kind of like how we talked about, just easy way to keep it up and out of the way. We are going to throw it back into the bow press, and we are going to press in our timing cord for our drop away, and we'll throw our peep sight in. So when we're throwing in our timing cord, I want to make sure I'm putting it into the down cable of my bow, and then we're trying to split that up as evenly as we can with those strands, and then we are going to press it through that control right at the bottom of that serving. A lot of bow manufacturers now are building strings to line up with right where you'd like to have that timing cord tied in, so we don't have to worry about trying to tie a knot in to keep it from slipping up. We'll still cut, burn, and frame so that we know it's not going to pull out of there, and we'll still add a little security knot that goes above and below it just so it can't pull out. But this is a great piece that a lot of bow companies have been doing now, is just adding that little touch of serving down low enough to where I don't need to worry about the knots that I would tie and having them slip with them. So that's all we need for our timing cable for now. We're gonna grab our Peep sight. I'm just using a really simple, a Radical 3/16 Peep. That 3/16 lines up really well for me with that proof that I'm running. 1/4 inch is gonna be a little bit too much daylight around, so this just gets me that good pin acquisition so that when I'm getting set up and anchored in, I can see that nice white ring around that Peep sight. And then on that bowstring, you'll see you've got that little piece of white serving. What that is just finding that dead center of that bowstring, so you don't have to worry about miscounting strands and having your Peep sitting angled in your bowstring. I still like to keep one of these in when I'm running a bowstring that's the same color. It's like with this being an all black bowstring, I will put that in once I throw this Peep in, just in case for whatever reason I needed to find true center again. I'll always have it. And then one thing that we're gonna look at too, I'm just gonna let a little bit of tension off onto that string, is I know in the past with my RX-8 Ultra, I was sitting right around a 5 7/8 inch-ish Peep sight. It's obviously gonna change with different axle to axles, but we're gonna at least get us into a close starting point. So I'm just gonna get us in the ballpark of what we're looking for, which that'll get us close. Okay. And then I'm just gonna trim that tag-end down just so it's not as obnoxious. I don't want it so short that I'm gonna lose it through the strand. That'll end up fluffing out and balling out on the top of it, but it's at least a nice little piece to make sure I can get back to true center if I ever needed to down the road. And I can see as we move that up, I'm gonna probably have to end up flipping that Peep around. So just for right now, I'm gonna flip that Peep into where it's probably gonna come back a little bit more straight for me. And now we're gonna run into the range. We're gonna do two things. We're gonna make sure that Peep height is feeling good, and we're gonna make sure that your timing cord on your drop away is locking back where we need to. So like I was saying, I like a hinge style of a release just because I found with my personal style of shooting, I've been shooting one long enough to where I feel the most comfortable with it. I will still always bring a backup. The Ultra View button is the same body as that, so just in case I'm shooting on a day where there's some pretty heavy winds, I still am a sucker for having a command shot on those windy days, but if weather conditions prevail, I personally love shooting a hinge release. What's cool about that hinge is you've got independent sears for my click and my fire, so I can really get it set up custom to how I like that shot to break and when. We're not shooting it right now. We're just making sure that length, Peep height, and that timing cord are all popping up properly. But I do want to use my release because different releases can change your anchor point. So we're going to get set up. And as we're pulling that bow back, I have it set up to where we should, as we get pulled back to full draw, what I'm looking for is making sure that rest is fully engaged at least an inch before the back wall. And then I'm also going to be making sure that my Peep height feels comfortable for me. So we're gonna get set up, see how it's looking. So you can see that rest instantly popped up right away, but as we continue to draw that bow back, it helped to pull that extra slack out of that cord. And as I let that bow down, it should have essentially just timed itself for us. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna do that one more time. I'm gonna see how that rest is popping up. We should see, hopefully we should be pretty close. So the rest is up. That's just a little bit too fast, but what we'll be able to do is we'll end up cutting and burning our tag-end so that we have it fixed where we need to. And since it's a little bit too slow right now, what we'll end up doing to also help us in the future is with that MX2, we're gonna loosen up a set screw and just pull that extra feed out of the front, which will also let us say down the road I wanted to go and lengthen my draw length out by a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. That's also gonna need to be lengthened with our timing cord. So that just helps to be able to have a little bit of play with it. So I'm actually gonna leave our rest time and where we're at right now, but then we'll take out that little bit extra material into the front side so it makes it a little bit more adjustable. So I'm just gonna pull that arrow out here. And then what we're doing to adjust with my proof is I want to make sure that, mainly in hunting scenarios, so I know I've always got that dead stop up at that 20-yard mark, I want to make sure that my wheel is maxed out at the top so I can easily find that first 0 mark. And then for sighting in, what we're going to want to do is adjust or loosen up those 2 set screws to adjust my rail up and down. And I found in the past with similar bows, I'm going to be more than likely sitting just towards that lower side of that rail. So we're just going to hold on to that, crack that loose, crack that loose, and then we're just going to drop her down. We're going to start it right here, and that should be really close to my 20 mark. And then what we're also going to do is I'm getting this bow set up for some longer range shooting. So what I also want to make sure is I have an anchor point that feels good for the bulk of my yardages. I personally like running that dial halfway down in between from where I'm at for my 0 stop and vane clearance, which is also the cool part about an MX2 compared to some other styles of rests out there, is I have that ability to be able to lock up my rest and be able to see what kind of fletching clearance I have with that mag. So I'm just lining myself up with where my nock would be on my bowstring, set up on my arrow rest, and then this will give me the ability to kind of know how much room I have out of my bow sight. So when I'm getting set up, I mean, a really rough estimate is I'm sitting somewhere in that adjustment range for my bow sight. So if I were to look at my setup tapes, on my setup tape, I can see I'm at that number 51, 52-ish. So just to be in the middle of that adjustment range, I'm just gonna bring it up just halfway. So I'll sit right around that 25 mark. I wanna make sure that that is feeling perfect for anchor point. What that'll traditionally feel in is when I'm shooting those really short distances, say I'm shooting at 20 yards, it's gonna feel like I'm scrunching up a little bit tighter in, a little bit more jaw pressure on my release, or scrunching down into that string a little bit more. But then as I get out to further ranges, it's also gonna kind of help me to relax that head position, have it feel really comfortable at those further ranges. So we're gonna see what that looks like. And again, we're still gonna get that peep height adjusted, get set up. Get anchored in. And right now we are pretty much perfect. We're just a smidge. I can just barely see a little bit more light towards the top side of that ring. So I'm gonna bring it down, I mean, just a smidge, but that is very, very close. I'll do that one more time. Another thing that I didn't mention about that proof is it has that top level, which allows you when you're setting up, I personally like having that bubble level on the top, just because it allows me to kind of keep myself in that target a little bit better. But that is pretty much perfect for peep height. So we're not going to shoot it yet because that's not tied in. So we're going to get that tied in. We're going to cut and burn our timing cord for our drop away, and then we're just going to take out a little bit of that tension that we need to adjust. All right, so we are back, finishing up our little final touches. Again, I know it's set up perfect where it's at right now, so I'm just gonna take my silver Sharpie. I personally like on these radicals, I'll do witness marks on both that top and bottom groove instead of running it just right down the middle of that peep sight. I like having with those dual ridges on them. It's nice to be able to know that I'm exactly confined to the space I need to be. And being that I'm fairly comfortable with this axle to axle from previous years, I'm pretty comfortable with not having my peep sight having to be adjusted down the road. If I do need to, I'll just have to end up either adding small twists into the bowstring, or we can always go and just cut that knot out and flip it if it needs to be drastic. But we are just gonna run a hard tie so we know that that peep's not gonna move. I'm gonna run 10 on the bottom. I'm always counting those knots so that it's nice and symmetrical. So I'm gonna run 10 on the bottom, bring that tag end over. Then I'm gonna add and hold tension in that bowstring now. We're just gonna count up until I have just that little bit of pressure from those splits on that bowstring. 4, 5, holding that peep together, 10. So we're gonna do 10 and 10. Once I get to that point, we are going to pick one side of that Peep to serve down. That first one I'm going to pull right underneath that yoke. And then this part is going to be more so how you want your knots to look. Some people do more, some people do less. This middle part, I just like finding something that looks relatively aesthetic and has enough twist to kind of hold its tension in place. And once we get up to the Peep, I'm going to make sure that I've got all those wraps are evenly spaced out, and I've got those witness marks that are lined up. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go one time over top on that other side of that split, and I'm going to pull that underneath that Peep. What that's going to help us do is snug up that hard tie underneath the Peep. So once that's pulled tight, I can relax tension on it, and it's holding my knot tension through there. And then I'm just going to wrap it around, just those couple of times around that Peep sight. I usually wrap it right around 3 times, and then I'm going to run it down that alternating side of the Peep. So same thing, just like I went one side above, tuck it underneath. We're going to do that same thing on this side. So I'm going to be running down that side of our split on our bowstring. So the first knot I'm going to do is going to be underneath, so I don't have to worry about losing that tension I just saddled in underneath. That pulls it in underneath that knot. And then once I'm at that point, I'm good to go and wrap around the other side of that split. So first one, pull underneath. Then we're just going to match up that amount of twists on the other side. Then we're going to make sure that our end serving matches up with the bottom of our hard serve that we just did. Get it one more time through. Again, making sure we've got relatively even tension. I'm going to pull that knot tight. And I'm wrapping around that twist, making sure I have just that little bit of pinch on that bowstring to help hold tension. There you go, 10 down, 3, 4, 5, and I'm holding tension underneath that finger, as you can see. And then we are going to back serve. That's probably around 10. Stop counting, sorry. And then we're just going to back serve that. So same idea. We're just going to take that, serving 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10. Bring that tag in over top. And then as I continue to add into the bottom of that, we are taking out of the top. And we're just going to keep pulling that knot all the way until we run out of twists. You can see as I'm taking it out, we're losing those twists. And once I get up here, just to avoid that serving kind of binding up as I'm pulling it tight under that string, I'll just take my thumb, kind of help guide it down into place so it doesn't ball up. And that'll run right up into that bowstring. Again, pulling tight into there. Usually what I'll do is I'll just take an Allen wrench or something just so I can wrap it around that serving. I don't want to wrench super tight on it, but I want to be able to have enough tension to know it's going to hold itself in place. So just a little bit of love to hold itself in place there. A little bit of love here, holding itself in place. And we'll cut and burn, and Peep is done. We're good there. Then we're just going to do that something similar. We're just going to do just a couple of stacked half hitch knots on the bottom. What I personally like to do with our timing cord is, I personally don't like cutting it right next to that bowstring, but what I will do is I'll just take a side cutter and I will use it almost as a pliers to pull that slack out. But what I am looking for is I'm giving myself just a little bit of breathing room to be able to make sure I can flare it out and melt it down without moving it. But then I'm just holding that tension in that side cutter and use it almost as a pliers to pull it away from that string so that I can cut that tag end off. And now I can burn it away from that control cable. So again, I personally don't like having the flame anywhere near bowstrings or cables, so I use that side cutter mainly just to be able to pull it further away, because if I were to cut it first, it's going to be really hard for me to try to take a pliers and pull that tag end out. Same idea here with the D-loop. Just really gradual heat to melt it down. And then when we're tying it in, so we're just going to run just a really simple stacked line of half hitch knots. Again, just going to give it just that little bit of pressure to flatten it out just a hair, but not make it super thin. And then last step, we're just going to be tying them in. Again, a little bit of wax goes a long ways. And then what I'll do when I am tying in my timing cord is I'm still, even though we have serving all the way up at the top, I still personally like doing just a couple of knots above it, just so that it allows me to kind of confine and hold that bottom stack into that actual control cable. So what I'm just doing is just that, almost like tying a D-loop for that first knot. We're gonna pull that tag in tight for our half hitch. I'm gonna butt that up right to the bottom of that serving on that control cable. And I'm just gonna do that twice, just so I have just a little bit of a knot on the top. And I'm taking those tag ends and bringing them around. Pulling that tight. Important part with a half hitch is you wanna make sure they're pulled really tight. If you don't pull them tight, they'll have a little bit more movement in them. And then I can pull that slack into them. I just want to make sure that now my timing cord, it doesn't have to be pulled all the way down to the bowstring right now, but I just want to make sure it is pulled all the way up to the base of that knot that we tied. And then I'm just going to continue that stack that we were doing. And I'm just going to do just 4 or 5 half hitches stacked tight on the bottom. And what you can kind of see on that down cable is when I'm looking at that knot now, I'm essentially kind of making a trap for that burnt end to where it cannot pull through that individual control cable itself. If I were to only tie on the bottom, and if for whatever reason that knot slipped down, you have maybe potential, if you're going through some really bad stuff, to potentially pull that out. But by having knots both above and below, it's really pinching yourself tight into place. So again, each one of these half hitches I'm tying, I'm pulling tight, and I'm always pulling tight and up into that down cable. And then I don't know the technical name for this knot. I always call it just a double half hitch because I'm going through twice. All I'm doing is that same thing as a traditional half hitch. I'm bringing it around, making a second half hitch behind that string, and then pulling it through that knot. And with that knot, I've never had any issues with knots falling apart or fraying out on me over time. So again, pull them tighten up. And then when we're cutting and burning that serving, we just want to make sure that we are in a direction that is facing, boy, if I can get that tightened down, to where my flames are not touching anything around my control cable. So, and we're just gonna trim down that tag end. You don't need to have a huge tag end to melt down. I'm spinning that knot straight up, and I'm just taking that heat and just coming straight down on it so that that flame is nowhere near my other control cables or bowstring. Just that little knob, pressure down, and we can just take that control cable, pull all the way up to that base, and now we're set up snug, and that's not going anywhere. Okay, other than that, I think we are ready to run through paper, make sure we've got a decent tune there, and then get our 20 dialed in, and we're good to go. So we're gonna grab our arrow, pull it out of the vise here. And one thing that I mentioned we're gonna do that we haven't yet is just adjust that set screw that's on the inside of that Q80. So what I'm going to be doing is just loosening up. There's a set screw inside here. I'm just going to crack that loose because our timing on our drop leg was just a little bit too slow. So I'm just making sure that's loose, and then they have that little burnt end in there. Let's make sure it's loose enough. And we're just going to pull just a little bit of that out just to speed up my rest timing just a hair. So paper tuning is really what we like to call the first step to getting your bow shooting well. It gives us a good indicator. Like paper tuning is what we're looking for, is how my field point enters through the target or through my piece of paper and how my nock is trailing behind it. So ideally what we want to see is having that nock following directly behind my point, looking for what is called your perfect bullet hole. And what this lets us know right away before we get out and start shooting out range at distance is just making sure that our bow is as tuned as possible and making sure that our arrows are kind of agreeing with the tune of our bow. So this gets us our one step closer to making sure that your bow is shooting as good as physically possible. And we're doing this just to start. We're sitting right around 8 feet away from that target, and we're just going to see what we've got for a tear. So we're going to run through and see what we're working with here. I'm just double checking that rest timing that we made an adjustment to. It's up and back, so that timing looks good. I'm just going to run through middle of paper. Okay, so if we look at that tear, as of right now, we can see our field point is entering right here, and our nock is coming just a little bit nock low and a little bit to the right. So we are going to just double check to see how much room we have in our rest for adjustments. And we are going to move our height as well, which I've still got the Allen wrench in here. So first thing that we can do right away is just adjust for that low tear. So first thing that we're going to be doing is loosening up just our arrow rest itself. And we're going to be trying to get that height out of it. With a low tear, just means my nock is just dipping out the bottom of the bow just a little bit. So I'm just cracking my set screw loose. Again, nice part about that micro adjust is I don't have to worry about anything sliding up or down. And then I'm just going to be looking at that indicator, and I just want to make sure that we're dropping into a lower position. It's not going to take much. We're not a ton off. So we're just going to start by giving it a few clicks, and we'll reshoot it there. Just want to snug that set screw down. And then I'm just going to recheck our center shot that we measured just to see. Right now we've got a nock right tear, which means we want to push that rest to the left or wheel our cams to the right. And so I'm just taking just a couple of just reassurances that we're looking where we need to be. And right now our center shot still looks really good. So what we are going to do is just make a really quick shim adjustment. We'll shoot one more just since we've already got that rest adjustment and we're already in here, just to see how our height looks. And then we're going to swing out to the press to see what we've got to do to move that cam over to get rid of that little bit of a right tear. So got better. We're still just a hair low. It's quite a bit better than what we're at for our first tear. Still the same amount nock right. So we are going to just barely push our cam over. So we're going to swing out to the bow press. And with a right tear, we're going to want to push. It's a really small tear, so we're not going to have to move it a lot. But we are going to want to shift it over to the right just a little bit. Now I'm just going to pull that back bar out just so it's out of my way. And then when we're working with taking an axle out, I just want to be extra aware of the tension that I'm putting on the fingers of the bow press. So right now what we've got to do is push our cams over just a little bit to the right. Right now when I look at my shims on my cam, what we will see, which I can show you here, is when I look at my spacers on my bottom cam, I've got those silver shims in there, and what we're seeing is that large shim is already on that left side of the cam, which is going to already be pushing ourselves to the right side. So that shim combination, we're in that right position. But when we look at our top cam, we can see we're flip-flop. So on this side, I should be able to flip-flop that larger shim over, and that should be able to push our cam just a hair to the right, and then we'll see what that gets us for a tear. So I'm really only worried with that small of a tear. We're just gonna move just that top shim, and we're just gonna flip them. And what I'm looking for is that as I'm adding pressure into that press, I wanna make sure I have nice, even tension. So I can kind of see in a really small way, as I'm getting pressed on those fingers, it looks like we're pretty good. I'm just a little bit tight on one of my fingers. Okay. And then when I'm taking that axle out, I just need to have just a little bit of pressure taken off that bowstring. I don't need to have it super loose, but I want to have it enough to where I'm not having to worry about any tension in my cables. We are going to use a couple of torque wrenches. We're going to come down to these screws, and we're going to take out, all we need to do is just take one side of that screw out. We're going to grab our handy dandy parts container so that I hopefully don't lose anything. We're going to line that up. I'm just cracking. So right now it's that inside screws came loose, so we're just going to take that one out. Gonna stow that away. And then we're going to use our handy dandy Hoyt tool to be able to just start to punch. Usually a little bit of tension to break that axle, but we're going to be pushing the axle completely out. What I do is once I get pressed down to there, you've got these nice little clips onto there, so I'm just going to grab a hold of one of those shims, and I'm going to grab actually an Allen wrench here to continue to push that axle out. And all we're looking at doing is, I don't have to take strings off or anything, I'm just going to be getting set up. I'm going to connect onto one of those shims. I'm going to press it, that axle, far enough out to where that shim is free. And I'm going to keep it in that tool. Slowly. So I'll leave it in that so I can just flip them over right away. So this is my skinny shim that I have. Okay, so we got that small shim out, and what we're gonna do before I pull that axle completely out is I'm gonna clip onto that large shim. And once I'm at that point, what I'm gonna do is kind of hold on to all of these kind of at once. I'm gonna pull that axle all the way out to the point where I can get that entire cam assembly out. I'm gonna leave all those control cables and bowstrings connected. I'm just gonna bring it down just to the bottom so it kind of holds itself in place. Then all we're just doing is taking that large shim, pushing it over to the other side, which is gonna push our cam further to the right to help get rid of that right tear that we had, hopefully. So we're just gonna reconnect on that small shim, pop that off. So small shim's on, we're just gonna work in reverse order here. So we're gonna bring that cam back up, run it through that axle, large shim goes on, and just want to make sure that we're lined up. And once I have that shims lined up, we can pop that out. And then the last step is looking right down that axle. You want to make sure that that axle is lined up with that hole. And once you're lined up, you just give it just that little tap, locks you in. Bring her back down, add that screw back in that we took out, and then we're just going to make sure that all of our strings and cables are all still lined up on the same piece. We'll drop that rest a little bit lower, so we're good there. Again, so making sure I've got bowstrings all on the right track. Controls are good. Top's good. Again, also get tension on there. That's all looking good. Gotta make one more rest adjustment since we're already over here. Okay. Just gonna crack that loose again. Bring it down just a little bit more. Snug it up, then we'll see what that gets us through paper here. Swing back in the range, see how that's looking. Alrighty. Okay, now we're real close. Our height looks good. And now we're just a fraction to the left, which if anything, our rest is just a hair outside of the riser. So we're gonna bring it in just a smidge. That little adjustment we can now do just in that micro adjustment in that rest. So we're just gonna loosen up that same set screw that we used originally for that center shot. And we're just a hair left, so we're just gonna bring it in just a touch to the right. Re-snug it back down. We'll pull that arrow out and send one more through her, and hopefully we're good. And one thing we can see too, as I'm getting set up, is my bowstring, just as we're getting a couple shots in, is just barely set off center right now. So just one of our last little final touches, we can just add just a half a twist into that bowstring just to get that peep coming back just a little bit more straight versus having to wrench it over or adjust my D-loop over just a hair. And that looks pretty dang good. So right now, this is what we're looking for. We've got our field point that's entering, and if anything, maybe we're still a hair off. We're close enough to where I'd say I'd want to shoot this bow in and go through a full tune after a couple hundred shots, but field point's entering almost dead center with those fletchings falling right around. So paper tuning, we're done. All right, so that's my personal RX-9 Ultra for this year, ripping at targets. Excited to get it out to some total archery and bowfest this year, maybe some couple extra shoots. Excited to be able to do a little bit of tinkering with it as I start getting out to range, playing around with stabilizers a little bit, making sure everything's fine-tuned and perfect. Stick around, we've got a Matthews build that we're going to be building more for the compact style for those tree stand hunters who are wanting something a little bit smaller. So tune into that video, and we've got a bunch more hunting content coming your way.